Hello, this is Bible Observations 101, and today we're going to be discussing a passage about King Josiah, king of Judah, and a very unusual prophecy concerning him. Before we get to the prophetic section, let's do a little background check on King Josiah. So Josiah, known as Yosheyahu is how you pronounce his name in the Hebrew tongue. Yosheyahu, or Josiah, was 8 years old when he became king. That's quite young. What's notable about King Josiah is he's going to do right in the sight of the Lord. He's going to walk in the ways of his father David. The reason why the author is identifying Josiah with David is because Josiah's immediate father, King Ammon, earlier in the text, is very wicked, very evil, which Josiah is not. So Josiah will be identified with his ancestor David instead. Now, what made Josiah right in the sight of the Lord? Well, Josiah, later on, the author lets us know that he removes idolatry from the land, right? Tears down the altars of the Baals, the Asherim, etc. And he's going to repair, restore, and cleanse the temple, right? He's going to have the priests begin doing that. And in the process, one of the priests, named Hilkiah, is going to find the book of the law, more than likely the book of Deuteronomy, and the book is going to be read in the presence of King Josiah. And so Josiah's response upon hearing the words of the law is going to say this in verse 21. Go, inquire of the Lord for me. What does that mean? So to inquire of the Lord means go to a prophet who speaks on behalf of God, right? That's exactly what's going to happen. And for those who are left in Israel and Judah, so because these words have been neglected in the law, earlier, God has poured out wrath upon Israel, so Assyria came and took a bunch of people from the land into exile, right? Jerusalem, the city, was spared, however. And for those who are left in Israel and in Judah, concerning the words of the book which has been found, book of Deuteronomy, for great is the wrath of the Lord, which is poured out on us, because our fathers have not observed the word of the Lord, to do according to all that is written in this book. So the inquiring of the Lord, they're going to go see a prophet. In this case, it's a female prophet, a prophetess, and she's going to basically speak on God's behalf and say some things. So in verse 23, she's going to say, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, tell the man who sent you to me, the man being Josiah. It's interesting she's not referring to him as a king, right, but just as a man. Thus says the Lord, Behold, I am bringing evil on this place and on its inhabitants, Jerusalem, all the curses written in the book, which they have read in the presence of the king of Judah. And she's going to go on and say because they have basically, they've forsaken God, they've worshipped other gods, etc., etc. And then she's going to address the king individually, right? Josiah, the individual, the king. But to the king of Judah who sent you to inquire of the Lord, thus you will say to him, Thus says the Lord God of Israel, regarding the words which you have heard, because your heart was tender, and you humbled yourself before God when you heard his words against this place and against its inhabitants, Jerusalem. You humbled yourself before me, tore your clothes, and wept before me. I have truly heard you. Behold, I will gather you to your fathers, and you shall be gathered to your grave in peace. So your eyes will not see all the evil which I will bring on this place and on its inhabitants. And they brought back word to the king. So what I want to focus on in this particular prophetic passage is verse 28 that Huldah gives, okay, concerning King Josiah. There's a lot of contention around this verse. And the reason why is this section. Behold, I will gather you to your fathers, and you shall be gathered to your grave in peace. So later on, what we learn about King Josiah concerning his end, or demise really, is that Josiah is going to die in battle. That doesn't sound very peaceful, right? So, and I'll explain what happens with this battle and the events leading up to it. But basically, Josiah is going to get hit by a stray arrow in this battle with King Necho at Megiddo, and he's going to be carried off to Jerusalem. There's some debate as to whether he died in Megiddo or Jerusalem based on the account in 2 Kings in relation to this account here in 2 Chronicles, but that's not going to be the object of discussion in this video. What we're going to discuss is the specific prophecy concerning where Josiah was buried, and what does it mean that he was buried in peace, right? So, how do we explain what's going on? Is there a contradiction in the prophecy that Huldah gives and the events later concerning Josiah's death, right? So, in verse 28, let's look at the immediate context. Behold, I will gather you to your fathers, and you shall be gathered to your grave in peace, right? So on the surface, it does look like a contradiction. However, later in the verse, this going to the grave in peace is explained. It's expounded upon. So your eyes will not see all the evil which I will bring on this place and on its inhabitants. So in the context of this verse, going to the grave in peace is in relation to Josiah not seeing God's destruction of Jerusalem and subsequently the destruction of the temple. That will happen later, right? So what's interesting is when you go up earlier, that's significant because Josiah literally just restored the temple. And that temple in Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. And Josiah, who repaired it, will not have to see what he worked for undone, right? Basically, the sins of Judah were too great, and even though Josiah made reforms, it was not enough to appease God's wrath, right? But Josiah himself will be spared from this sorrow, from this lament, okay? And so that's the context of going to the grave in peace here, okay? Not being swept up by the Babylonians later on, right? So I also want to emphasize that what the author is really alluding to is the idea of being buried and not the form of death. In another passage, when it comes to a man named Joab in 1 Kings chapter 2, there is the idea of going to the grave in peace in relation to him dying bloody. But in the context of this passage in verse 28, that is not what's going on here. And I'll explain why. This is actually what's known as a prophetic riddle. There's a riddle involved. Let me show you. So later, concerning Josiah's burial, that's the important thing, his burial. It's going to tell you, after he gets shot by the arrow, that his servants took him out of the chariot and carried him to the second chariot, which he had, and brought him to Jerusalem. And he died. Doesn't say where, it says and. And he died and was buried in the tombs of his fathers, right? And because he was a good king, everyone's going to mourn for him. And so the point is, he was buried in the tombs of his fathers. So remember Huldah's prophecy, he'd be gathered to his fathers. That's a check mark, right? Okay, she's correct on that. But what about being gathered to the grave in peace? Well, really quick, the word Jerusalem is composed of two words. Yeru, which means to contend. And we know Yeru means to contend because of Judges chapter 6. It lets you know that. And then Salem, which means peace. Salem means peace. Contend and peace. So Josiah is going to be buried. Doesn't matter that he died there. It matters that he's buried there. He was buried in Jerusalem. Okay? Jerusalem, remember, like I said, is composed of two words, to contend and peace. So, think about it. Josiah was buried in the city of peace. Huldah the prophetess says he would be gathered to the grave in peace. He'd be gathered in Salem. So this is a prophetic wordplay. Gathered in the city of peace, he would go to the grave in peace. And so that explains what's going on in this passage. It's a prophetic riddle. Now, I want to explain why this whole thing happened with Necho and Josiah, them fighting in the first place. Like, what led up to that, right? So, really quick, let me show you guys a map. Now that the prophetic riddle aspect has been explained. Here you have Egypt, right? It is southwest of Israel, right? Southwest of Jerusalem, really mainly just west, right? It's right here. And the Pharaoh is going to travel all the way up here, and Josiah is going to meet him at Megiddo. Now, why does he go through Israel? Why does he go through Israel to meet the king of Babylon at Carchemish? Right? Carchemish is up here, as you can see where my cursor is. Why does Babylon go up here and go to Carchemish, and Necho go up there to Carchemish? Why don't they just cut across this region here, and then they wouldn't have to worry, Josiah wouldn't have to worry about Necho cutting across his territory, right? And Necho wouldn't have to worry about offending the king. Well, in between Babylon, which is over here, and Egypt, there's a vast desert. There's no water, okay? As you can see, they are traveling up here along the Euphrates River. This is the Euphrates. So when an army travels, you need to be close to water sources, right? And so it would be not tenable to cross this big desert to go fight each other. So Necho is going to travel through Israel to meet the king at Carchemish, right? Now, Josiah is like, hey, man, I don't want you coming through my territory, right? And so Josiah is told by the king that actually God is sending me, okay? The word of the Lord came to me, okay? So you're fighting against God. You're not even fighting against me. And so because Josiah does not heed the words of God, Josiah will subsequently die at Megiddo, right? Which is in Israel. So that sort of explains sort of the background of why this even occurred in the first place. I hope this video was instructive, but I think I'll end it here. Thank you guys. Take care.